conference. I feel like I have to take the over, but barely. I'm talking 43, 44 wins.
Absolutely. I think that's a great prediction. And I think overall, you have to kind of bank on the system, the fact that a lot of other teams got worse, and the fact that, ultimately, if Butler is there, he's going to be worth, with the team around him. I mean, you've got to think he's going to get them to at least the low 40s with what he can do. I mean, we saw what he did with the Chicago team where he really dragged them. And this team has more talent than that team did. So I agree with you. I think we got to go over 42 and a half. But yeah, it's tight.
So that leads us to our next team. We'll stay in Florida here. And you know about the wonderful world of Disney?
I do.
So the Orlando Magic, they lay claim to being the wonderful world of big men because they have more big men than any other team in the league. In fact, if the two division rivals here wanted to make a trade, I could see a couple of these big men thriving in Miami with the Heat. But no, the Magic enter training camp this week. By the way, happy almost training camp eve, with a plethora of big men on their roster. I mean, you have Mo Bamba, Kem Birch, Nikola Vucevic, Amile Jefferson, Aaron Gordon. This team is loaded in the front court, and there's just not going to be enough playing time to go around. And then you have to worry about how they filled out the rest of their roster at the other positions. I mean, this team has potential to be good, but it is such a bad chemistry fit with all of these big men on the roster all at once, don't you think?
You're absolutely right, Jason. And ultimately, if you look, there's even a few other names that you could pop in here. They're natural positions, being power forward. I mean, there's just a glut of guys here who are going to want to play that four. And newsflash, Jason, haven't gotten any more point guards or shooting from a year ago. So that's a concern. It's just this team is really tough to really evaluate, I think, because of the fact that they are based on sheer talent. They should be on the upper half of the Eastern Conference, but their fit is just abysmal. I mean, you look at guys like Evan Fournier, who, I mean, he's really the only shooter you can count on this team, and a guy like DJ Augustine right now is projected to start at point guard. So, Markel Fultz could come in there, but again, that's not helping the shooting. They got Michael Carter Williams, who is debatably the worst shooting point guard in the entire league. I mean, that's rough. It's just a rough fit for them. They paid a lot of money to bring these guys back. And the guys who I really feel for here, Jason, are Jonathan Isaac and Aaron Gordon, who feel like they're just really going to get underutilized again this year and have to play sort of out of position again. Because you look at an Aaron Gordon, I mean, I'm not sure there are many more talented young players in the league than Aaron Gordon who haven't made an all-star team. And I think a big part of this for him is that he just hasn't been able to really play his game for very long in his career. I mean, do you see someone on this team that could sort of get to have a breakout season that could maybe push this team up from where they were a year ago?
The obvious X factor here is Markel Fultz. I mean, the Magic are essentially taking a free flyer on him. He was given up on by the Sixers, didn't pan out there, going to a smaller market where hopefully he'll thrive in a team full of talented big men, because a lot of them are talented, Ben. I think if Fultz could reach even 75% of the potential that made him the number one pick in the draft a couple of years ago, the Magic will be in great shape. But if it doesn't work, Fultz could find himself out of the league, which would be unprecedented for a former number one pick not named Anthony Bennett. So I think Fultz holds the keys to the Magic Kingdom here for Orlando. And if he has a good year, the Magic will be completely set up. I like the Aminu signing, provides solid veteran leadership. It can kind of, if any of the big guys aren't playing, he could maybe help sort of keep them in line, make sure no one's acting out. So I think the chemistry fit's good, but from a basketball standpoint, this team is a terrible fit as a whole. But Fultz really is a huge X factor here for this Magic team.
Yeah, and I think you can really look at this in two ways. The first way you can look at this and say, well, Fultz can barely drink alcohol legally in this country. He's 21 years old. There's a lot of room for improvement. The other hand is that we really have not seen any demonstrable evidence here that he's an NBA player. I mean, when he has been on the court since he joined the league, Jason, he has been well below sub replacement. I mean, he's been completely unplayable while he's been out there. And if you believe that that's due to injury and that this is a guy who really just needs to get healthy and get his head right, then okay. But if you're the Magic, there's a lot riding on Fultz this year, and I think they've been smart to try and kind of keep him out of the spotlight. But man, Jason, if you're a Magic fan, you've got to be a little worried about how much of your team's hopes are in this guy, particularly since, I mean, they're trying to make the playoffs, right? You know, at the end of the day, they can't give him that long of a leash. They can't let him have 60 games to figure it out because that might be their playoff spot. So I do worry a little bit about that experiment kind of being a real problem for them because they don't have as much cushion as a team like the Sixers did, who had Joel Embiid, who have, you know, really ultra talented guys around him, so he can kind of come along. On this team, if he goes in there and he flames out, the Magic can't really let him come along at his own pace. They need him to play right away, or he might not play at all, Jason.
Yeah, it's going to be really tricky. And I'm going to make a bold prediction because somebody's got to go. So I'm going to go out on a limb in September and say that Aaron Gordon gets traded at the deadline, regardless of their position. You know, they paid Vucevic $100 million to come back after a lot of people thought he was going to Boston to play with Kemba Walker. And instead they get a cheaper big man in this Cantor. We'll talk about the Celtics, obviously, in a few weeks here as we continue our baseline jumper division previews. But Gordon's got to go. You know, his contract's manageable. There's a team somewhere with a hole at power forward. Gordon could be that missing piece. I mean, imagine him in San Antonio playing next to LaMarcus Aldridge and DeMar DeRozan. That would be a great fit. So I think the Magic need to do right by somebody. And my pick for that is Aaron Gordon. Get him out of there. Let a lot of these young big men play and get Gordon onto a true contending team. I mean, out of all these guys that could potentially be moved, you know, come February, do you think anyone else, or do you think Gordon's the guy?
Oh, it's definitely Gordon. And I mean, I think a team like the Celtics or the other team that would be, you know, a natural fit for the guy. I mean, you imagine one of their wings going for Gordon. I mean, I think Gordon, the funny thing is, in the league that we have today, you could almost see Gordon playing small ball five in some places if this was a different team. I mean, with the way that the league is shifting, he can hold his own against true fours. And you do wonder almost if other teams would almost shift him up a position, play him mostly at four and a little bit of small ball five, which is the total opposite of what Orlando has done. So I do think that he's the guy who could get moved here, but I don't know if he will get moved. And the reason I say that is that this is a team that really prides itself on making the playoffs, and I wonder if they're going to really be able to get equal value for Gordon in the trade straight up. And I'm not sure many teams are going to be able to give that to them unless it's in the form of draft picks or younger players, which will obviously hurt their chances this year. And what they did in the offseason signals that they're not ready to think that way, which has been a problem for them for quite some time now. So kind of with that in mind, Jason, let's sort of look at the floor and ceiling of this team. For me, their ceiling is maybe the 7th seed. Maybe I could be talked into them getting to the 6th seed, but certainly a lower end playoff seed in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, I think their ceiling is right back where they were last year, 7th seed tops. Just making the playoffs would be an accomplishment for them. I don't see them in that top tier where I think Miami has enough firepower to maybe squeak out a first-round victory. The Magic have no shot. I mean, you saw them win Game 1 in Toronto in that first-round series this past spring, and then it was a gentleman's sweep. They got absolutely dismantled by the eventual NBA champions and shown that they need a lot more in order to compete and contend in the NBA. And they answer to that by pretty much keeping the exact same team together, you know, with the exception of their rookies. You know, when the hell is Mo Bamba going to play? You know, I have some serious questions when it comes to this team. So I think their floor It's no secret. The lottery, similar to the Heat, they're not as bad as the Wizards, the Hornets, the Cavs, the Knicks, but I could see them finishing 11th or 12th if they struggle, if the team struggles to fit together on the court and play at a very high level. If Gordon gets traded and then the team just completely fades down the stretch, then I think their floor is a lottery team, a bona fide lottery team.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to get a little creative with the floor for this team and say for me, I think the floor would be if they were the ninth or 10th seed, Markelle Fultz doesn't work out, and they stick with the current roster throughout the year to try and compete for a playoff spot and then don't make it. To me, that is the worst case scenario for this team because then they are left with question marks with what to do with a guy like Mo Bamba, who you kind of highlighted. Aaron Gordon is a year closer to free agency. They have to figure out what to do with Isaac. They still have no answer at point guard, and they still don't have really an elite wing. I mean, that to me is the real worst case for this team is that they could end up in a position where they neither make the playoffs nor have a coherent long-term view for the team. And that's where they've really been for a while now, and I fear it could go into the season. I am a little bit worried for them.
Which is why, as we get into the over-under, this is the only one you and I wholeheartedly disagree on. The over-under is set at 40 and a half games. And you know what, Ben? I'm taking the under. I'm thinking things do not go as well in Disney World as it did this past year. I think this is a team headed for turmoil. The front office did not do its due diligence with the plethora of big men that they have. So I think they're going to win 37, 38 games, which may not be enough to make the playoffs in the East.
Yeah, you know what? At the end of the day, I might look back on this and regret it, but I'm picking the over, and I'm picking it just because of the way that the incentives are for this team. It really seems like the front office and the ownership wants to win games, and that they're going to be willing to kind of make moves to do that from what we saw in this offseason. So my inclination is to pick the over on teams like that because when teams get into that position, sometimes they can make some short-sighted decisions that help them in the current season and hurt them down the road. So I always kind of hedge my bets with those by picking overs, but this is certainly to be a stay away. I would not bet this either way, but I could definitely see myself coming around to the under and feeling a little silly for not agreeing with you, Jason. So I think you made a solid pick there. But let's talk about the most exciting team in the division, Jason, and the one that I know that I really am kind of dying to break down, which is the Atlanta Hawks. One of the most exciting teams, not just in the division, but in the entire league. They decided to fast track their rebuild a little bit in this year's draft as well by getting two guys in the lottery, making a move to get both DeAndre Hunter and Cam Reddish, which many people feel like will not just be the starting lineup of the future in combination with some of their other young players, but in fact, those guys could end up in the starting lineup this year. Cam Reddish was selected by his fellow rookies to be, Jason, the best NBA player out of this bunch in terms of his career, which was, I think, very surprising for a number of people. What do you make of this team? What do you think it'll look like this year, and are you excited for these Atlanta Hawks?
I'm very excited. In a division where not a lot of these teams are expected to do very much, you said the Hawks might be the most exciting team in the division. I agree. I also think they're the most interesting team in the division when it comes to young talent. You start with the two cornerstones with Collins and Young. I mean, can they take another step forward? I picked Trae Young to win Rookie of the Year last year before I knew who Luka Doncic was. So I think Young is in for a huge sophomore year. You've said on past shows that Collins has some all-star potential. You mentioned Kevin Huerter, who's a solid shooter there. And then you bring in the two rookies in Hunter and Reddish. And that is a nice young core for Lloyd Pierce to have for years down the line. I think the Hawks could make a run for the playoffs this year. I've been saying that since the night of the draft. I think they have an excellent complement of veterans on this roster. When you look at Jabari Parker, Chandler Parsons, even though he can't play too much anymore, Alan Crabb, Vince Carter, Evan Turner, Alex Len. I mean, they have a solid complement of veterans who have been on playoff teams all over the league. When you mix that in with this young core, this is the chemistry fit that I think both Florida